First-Plymouth was founded in 1866, and today at the end of the service we're celebrating those who have been part of First-Plymouth for 50 or more years, fully a third of our historic life. This is a great joy. We make church together. In fact, let me see the wider swath here. Raise your hand if you've been at First-Plymouth 1 year or less. Oh, awesome. Welcome. Welcome to church. Raise your hand if you've been at First-Plymouth 10 years or less. Wonderful. This is great. Raise your hand if you've been at First-Plymouth 20 years or less. Awesome. 30 years or less. Cool. 40 years or less. 50 years or less. Actually, but raise your hand if it's more than 50. Oh, yeah. Hey, you're supposed to be over here. Now, to those that have been here at least 50 years, it occurs to me you've probably heard enough sermons. On the other hand, why not one more? Jesus turns no one away empty unless they are full of themselves. Oh, I like that line. It's from a famous preacher early in the 20th century. Jesus turns no one away empty unless they're full of themselves. You see, Jesus gives us what we need. If you come to Him, though, and are pretty self-absorbed or self-involved, if you're pretty focused on self, He will empty you of that so that you can be present to others. But Jesus gives us what we need. If you're actually the opposite, if you are feeling insecure and not sure whether you measure up, maybe you always don't think you're good enough. Well, you come to Jesus, He will lift you up and empower you and give you the confidence you deserve, that the love of self you deserve. So this is a tough sweet spot to achieve for us. I bet most people in this sanctuary either don't feel good enough about themselves, or maybe you're a little self-absorbed and self-centered. The sweet spot is hard for us. But know this, we're with Jesus right now. That's how I think of worship. This is a gathering of friends of Jesus, and He's here. You can get what you need right now. He's here. So last week, I was at a government conference on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. About 150 folks, rabbis, imams, Christian ministers, we gathered looking at the complex ways that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are kind of converging these days around Gaza and around presidential politics. And I was impressed with the job the government did addressing those issues. And I found myself inspired in that room. Something special was happening. Now, they asked me to speak for a few moments about religion in America. Now, when I do that, oftentimes I'll just say you need to know three numbers: 65, 30, and 5. Notice that adds up to 100%. So to have a sense of American religion, first 65. 65% of Americans self-identify as Christian. Now, that number's been going down over the last 28 years. It was 78%, but still 65% is a sizable majority. And in a country as populous as America, it might be hard for you to imagine how big Christianity is. 65% of Americans self-identify as Christian, and there are 350,000 churches. Now, it's hard to hold the scale of this to our mind. You've heard that religion is under downward pressure or shrinking, sure, but it's so mammoth to begin with. 350,000 churches. There are 17,000 Starbucks in America. And they seem like they're everywhere. But there are 350,000 churches. There are 69,000 bars in America. They seem like they're everywhere too. But there are 350,000 churches. There are 98,000 public schools across this land. But there are 350,000 churches. It's hard to hold the scale to mind. There are about 146,000 gas stations in America. But 350,000 churches. The scale is almost unimaginable. There are 300,000, now this is getting close. There are 300,000 traffic lights in America. But 350,000 churches. Now I know if you're trying to cross Lincoln, it seems like there's 1,000,000 traffic lights you'll hit, right? But there are more churches. The scale of Christianity in America is hard to fathom. 65. 30% of Americans will not identify with any religion. That number has been growing. 30% won't claim an identity, but really, if you unpack that number, many of them have come from the Christian tradition. Many of them actually still go to church. And if you ask, many of them will say they're spiritual. They'll say, I'm spiritual, but not so much religious. I kind of like that. I mean, I don't think Jesus came necessarily to start a religion, but I know he wants us to be spiritual, to grow in love. That's 65-30. Do you know what the 5 is for? There's only 5% left. 5% is every single other religion in America clumped together is only 5%. That's Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Every other religion you could think of is only 5% of America. So consider with me that 95% of America doesn't have much experience with other religions. Consider that most Americans never would have been to Shabbat on a Friday night at the local synagogue, or never would have been on Friday midday prayers at the mosque, or never would have been in a Hindu temple pouring coconut milk over an image of the gods. 95% of America doesn't have practically any connection with the other religions. And my friends, supermajorities of that size can be dangerous. Supermajorities of that size could have their foot on someone's neck and not even know it. They can be unconsciously evil. They wouldn't know it. So I felt something important was happening in this gathering, to sit there with rabbis and imams and ministers. We need to know one another. It felt like an Acts 2 moment in that room. It was a government program, but it felt like the Spirit was at play, connecting us across divides. We need that for a better world. And as I sat there, experiencing all the differences and the beautiful variety, I felt something awaken in me, become reanimated. Because earlier in my ministerial career, I used to be involved a lot in multi-faith work. In fact, just post 9/11, when we felt how dangerous a world it is unless we create relationships, I was the founding president of a network in San Francisco of 500 clergy of all religion, imams and Buddhist priests and Roman Catholic priests and ministers and rabbis, the whole, trying to create more relationship because that's what we need. And I felt that I was being called again to do some of this work. As I sat in that room, I began to sense a certain presence. Now, I'd known from my work years before that if you're going to gather with other religions, you don't have to have some meta theory about religion. In fact, it's probably better if you don't. You don't have to somehow think, oh, all the religions are really the same. They're just different paths up the mountain. But actually, you don't need a meta theory like that, or the idea that, well, maybe some religions are superior to others. You definitely don't need those kind of theories. What you need is to share three basic values. One, to have some appreciation. Just to appreciate the intrinsic beauty of these different traditions, these different cultures, to just appreciate the beauty of it. And secondly, there needs to be the value, and you have to hold on to it tightly, that every single human being in the world has intrinsic dignity. And then thirdly, there has to be the desire to reduce violence in our world. Oh, if you share those values, the relationships, the sense of common endeavor, shared purpose, what can emerge is beautiful across all divides. I began to feel something in that room. All our beliefs were very different. The beliefs of those religions are super different. So I didn't feel like we were sharing beliefs at all, but we were sharing something spiritual. And I want to use the word faith to describe that. Not beliefs, but we shared faith. Let me speak to faith for a moment. You see, faith is something larger than mere beliefs. Faith is something more foundational than our specific beliefs. Your faith may include some beliefs, but your beliefs cannot encompass all that faith is about. Faith is something above and beyond belief. Faith is a way of being, not a set of beliefs. Oh, let me highlight the priority of faith over belief. Faith is the orientation of your total being to the truth that there is meaning and purpose to our lives, that there is God. Faith is something existential, more attitudinal. Faith is more a matter of the heart than the head. Now, particular beliefs are how your mind affirms certain propositions, but faith is what allows your whole person to say yes to life itself. Beliefs are in your head. Belief is mere ideation. Faith is your relationship with reality itself. Faith is your trust in the fullness of today and the promise of tomorrow. Beliefs are your attempt to hold on to something. Faith is your willingness to let go of things. It is faith that makes hope possible. Faith is hope. Faith is love. God is love. God is hope. Faith is what makes possible that tomorrow might be better than today. And so we can forge on with hope. Faith is so much bigger than beliefs. And you can see this in the fact that God does not have any beliefs. God has faith. God doesn't need beliefs. If you're omniscient, you know everything. You don't need to believe anything. But God has faith. Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness. God has faith. Our Christian tradition will elaborate many beliefs, but there's only one faith, and it's of God herself. Now, beliefs can divide people. If in that room in Omaha, we would have just talked only about our beliefs, they're all different, and they can divide us. But faith is what brings us together. Beliefs can create violence in our world, but faith never killed anyone. Beliefs become this issue of what you think is right or wrong, and beliefs become issues of who's superior or inferior, but faith is pure inclusion and acceptance. The beliefs will always inspire division, but faith can inspire a unity. Faith is what perceives that every single human being is of intrinsic worth and dignity. Faith knows every human being is imago Dei, made in the image of God. And so faith knows that every single act of violence in our world, every single act of hatred or bias is a lack of faith. Do you see this? Violence is not recognizing the imago Dei, that each human being is the very image of God. Every moment of violence is a lack of faith. Jesus did not say, when the Son of Man comes back to earth, will he find beliefs? He said, will I find faith? Is there faith on earth? Religious beliefs, with all the theological ornamentation and such, sometimes religious beliefs can sound a little ridiculous or unscientific, but faith, by definition, includes reason and science, because faith is one's total orientation to the world, not a carved out portion that we call religion or theological belief. Beliefs will always become hard and brittle and rigid, but faith, by definition, is something more ambiguous and thus more real, because faith can never even be sure of God. Faith cannot even grasp God, but faith is being grasped by God. Beliefs are always trying to creep up on certainty. This is the goal of a belief, to somehow become certitude. And certitude in our world is something fearsome and dangerous. It's always someone who thinks they know all the answers or thinks they know the real truth. It's them that can become dangerous in this world. But faith never seeks to dominate. It seeks submission and humility. Faith never seeks certitude. 2 Corinthians 5, we walk by faith, not sight. We don't know for sure. Hebrews 11, faith is the assurance of things not seen. We don't know. Things hoped for. You need a lot of beliefs to create an official religion. But you need just a tiny little of faith, just a tiny little bit, to make this world more loving. Jesus said that to us. Oh, you need the faith of a mustard seed, just the tiniest amount, and the world becomes less violent. Just the tiniest bit of faith, and hope starts to open up, and we all see a better future. May there be faith.